The Islanders, playoffs hopes over. And the front office has some pretty crucial offseason decisions ahead after a pretty disappointing season. So let's talk Al's hockey with Ethan Sears, who's our Islanders beat writer with the Post. Ethan, what's going on, man? It's a season where Captain Anders Lee said that it's a year where we left games on the table. And in one of your recent articles, you said that some of these final games have a preseason vibe to them. This here is New York City. Fingers have to be pointed. There has to be some sort of blame on someone's shoulders. So, how much is Lou Lamoriello and Patrick Waugh to blame for this lost season?
Well, Brandon, first of all, thanks so much for having me. There's plenty of blame to go around, and the two of them, without a doubt, share a lot of it. Lou Lamoriello has stuck by this group and this core for a long time, and coming into this season, the thought was that a couple additions, Anthony Duclair, Max Siplikov, and a full year of Patrick Waugh being the head coach would allow the Islanders to take a big step forward and be, better than that kind of first round and out team that they've been the last few years. Obviously, that didn't happen. And trading Brock Nelson at the trade deadline, plus the what's kind of the expected trajectory here that there could be some more moves over the summer. That's basically an admission that what's been a years long calculus on the organization's part to stick by these guys was wrong, and that the Islanders need to start thinking in terms of what their next core looks like as opposed to what they can still squeeze out of this one. And with Waugh, he did a great job last year to get them to the playoffs. And the training camp he ran back in September, at the time, it looked like a really spirited training camp. It looked like they got everything done that they wanted to do. And then pretty early on in the season, both special teams units were really struggling. The penalty kill kind of recovered after January or so. The power play never did. And Patrick Waugh was saying, well, we probably should have spent more time on special teams in training camp. So that's one kind of immediate, I guess, red flag that's come to mind. There's been a lot more players this year who have underperformed kind of what was expected of them in the preseason and guys who have overperformed. Obviously, the team as a whole has underperformed and never really found an identity for more than maybe a month or so at a time. There's a lot of reasons for that. Injuries are one that nobody really controlled, and they had a lot of them. But certainly with Patrick Waugh, you feel a lot less confident than you did a year ago.
Well, let's stay on wide. I'm glad you brought up training camp because I believe we spoke during training camp, and I was wondering, like, why is this guy running camp like some sort of boot camp instead of worrying about and paying attention to championship-like details? And this is a guy that's a hockey great. He's got all the credentials as a backup to prove that. So I can't question him, but he's received a lot of heat after ripping into Anthony Duclair so badly that he needed to take time away from the team. And then most recently, just completely botched rookie goalie Tristan Lennox's NHL debut. So I'm going to remove this from you, Ethan, but is it fair for Islanders fans to question Waugh's decision-making going forward?
Well, it's certainly fair to question the sort of public, the way that he's talked about some of these guys in public. I mean, Brandon, you played in the NFL. You played for Tom Coughlin. If Tom Coughlin had come out after you had a rough game or a rough week in practice and said, Brandon is god awful. I don't think he's trying. He's not running hard. I mean, even if that were true, like that's not something that you say in
Yeah,
public.
yeah,
Like how would you have reacted? How would your teammates have reacted, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, and one of the reasons you go back to Patrick Waugh's tenure in Colorado a decade ago and sort of why it sort of fizzled out there. And one of the reasons is that he is a very emotional, hard on his sleeve guy. And that's what helped make him great as a player. And when it is harnessed in the right way, it can be a really effective thing as a head coach. But there were times this year where you saw it get him in trouble. And the way he talked about Duclair, and that's a guy who has 3 years left on his contract, who was signed to be a top six guy, who had a bad injury early in the year that he rushed back from, and who also came to the Islanders in large part because of Patrick Waugh. And none of that is to excuse what was a really bad year on Duclair's part. But to talk about him that way in public is really harsh.
Yeah.
And what happened with Lennox, again, that's just not something. And Patrick Waugh, being a goaltender himself, should know better than to
Yeah.
have done that. And there's other stuff earlier in the year. Stan Bolduc back in November had a really tough game at the Rangers. Had been kind of struggling, and Patrick Waugh said, it's sad. Like that was the word he used, was sad.
Yeah.
And Bolduc's been in the AHL the rest of the year. Pretty much is now like you're not going to see him in the NHL again with the Islanders. Some of the stuff with Pierre Engvall kind of throughout the year that made it seem like Patrick Waugh didn't have confidence in his player, and a lot of people looked at those comments as indicative of maybe a little bit of Waugh and Lou Lamoriello not being on the same page about this player. That's the kind of stuff that, we all love it when players and coaches are honest. I'm never going to criticize somebody for doing that, right? But for people who are in the organization or who are, around the league kind of just watching, that's the kind of stuff that is going to raise eyebrows, that is going to cause people to question you. It just is.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's hard to question a guy who won the Vezina Trophy 3 times, but I don't know what he was thinking with the Tristan Lennox decision to put him out there. And to answer your question, if Tom Coughlin would have kind of called me out like that, being the player that I was, being a bubble guy, I would have personally had to eat that. But a Plaxico Burress, Amani Toomer, Antonio Pierce, those guys weren't going to have that, and they would have came out firing in the media themselves instead of kind of taking time away from the team. So, I mean, we get it. Like the coaching decisions, we can question. We can question the lack of effort, and I know there's no excuses in pro sports, Ethan, but how much did injuries kind of play a role into the Owls not making the playoffs?
A huge one, Brandon. And it that does make it a little hard to kind of sort through all of the other factors because look, all six of their defensemen who were in the lineup on opening night missed time. A lot of them were out at the same time over various points. Matt Barzal played just 30 games, and you saw their momentum kind of fizzle out after he got hurt for the second time. That wasn't a coincidence. Um, Anthony Duclair hurt his groin 5 games into the season, rushed back from it, and really never looked the same. Clearly, was still dealing with it. Semyon Varlamov got hurt the day after Thanksgiving, and that had a huge impact on their goaltending and the way they had to play Ilya Sorokin in pretty much every game for long stretches of the season. So as much as you talk about these other things, and as much as Lou Lamoriello or Patrick Waugh or any sort of individual player underperforming, obviously had a factor here. You can't run from the fact that maybe the season does play out differently if the Islanders are healthy, and nobody can say. But it's pretty obvious that injuries were a big part of why this went wrong.
All right, they got what, 2-3 games left on the season. I believe this season is going to be a wash after they're done. But let's look ahead a little bit. How do they move on from here? Kind of talk to us about what you think their plans are going to be for the draft and free agency. And two-part question to this thing, Ethan. when we talk about free agency after everything that just went down this season, everything that you mentioned during this interview, are the top free agents in the league going to want to come here and play?
So to start with that, I I don't think that this will create issues in terms of getting free agents to come. I think that and I'll assume just for the sake of answering this question that Patrick Waugh and Lou Lamoriello are still going to be here because it's easier to play out that hypothetical than anything else. I think there is probably still an attraction for some people of, Patrick Waugh is an all-time great. He's a guy people respect. You know, Long Island for a long, long time was a place that was really hard to attract people to play. I think that is less of an issue now with the new arena, with the practice facility that's really nice. A management group that generally has a good reputation throughout the league. Maybe some people don't like Lou Lamoriello's kind of rules about facial hair or whatever, but I don't think that's really a decisive thing in why anybody would come or not. Um, as far as moving forward, the Islanders are going to have a lot of cap space this summer. I think it's 28 or 29 million, depending on a couple, like how you count. A lot of that is going to have to go towards re-signing their own restricted free agents. But they will have room to do something in free agency. They have kind of tried to make moves there in the past unsuccessfully. I'm sure that people are going to bring up, Mitch Marner's name. They are already. I don't know necessarily how realistic that is, but it makes sense for the Islanders to try. And I think you're going to see more moves that kind of move the Islanders away from the core that has become synonymous with this sort of era of Islander hockey. Whether that's JG Pageau is going to have 1 year left on his deal. There are going to be teams calling about him. Anders Lee has 1 year left on his deal. There are going to be teams calling about him. Whether or not the Islanders ultimately make moves there depends on the specifics of, what they're getting back in return and things like that. But I would imagine based on how Lou Lamoriello talked after the trade deadline and based on the general trajectory here, that, you are going to see some bigger changes than we have seen here in a long time. And I don't think that's going to necessarily mean tearing it all down and they're tanking next year and trying to get the number one pick. I don't think Lou Lamoriello would ever really do that. But, I think there's a good chance that next year could kind of be transitory in a sense of moving towards a team that is built around younger guys and let's say Matt Barzal and Bo Horvat and Ilya Sorokin versus that kind of, fourth line, identity line, guys that, were sort of embodied the like Barry Trotz teams that got to the conference finals twice.
All right, with 2 games left in this season before we can officially put the 2024 season to bed and look ahead, or 2024-2025 season to bed, look ahead to next year. So, Ethan, thanks for hopping on with us, my man.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks so much for having me, Brandon.